President Cyril Ramaphosa is back in the country after cutting his international trip short. Ramaphosa expected to attend to the Eskom power crisis. Eskom has implemented stage 6 load shedding this past week, leaving most parts of the country in darkness. This is not the first time the president has had to cut his international trip short. In the winter of 2019, you'll recall, the president had to return from Egypt after almost a week of load shedding. Joining us now is political analyst Mpumelelo Mkhabela, who is also an author of a book called The Enemy Within, How the ANC Lost the Battle Against Corruption. Mr. Mkhabela, thank you very much for making the time to join us in studio here. The president cutting his international trip short. It's the second time he's had to do this. Is there anything that is going to come of it, or a mere PR exercise?
Nothing that would come out of it, Goli, specifically because of him returning to the country, cutting short his international trip, because there is nothing that he can do uniquely by his presence, which he can't do even when he is away. We have experience of that before, when he rushed his trip coming back home before, convened meetings with Eskom leadership and members of cabinet. You know, you recall that hushed briefing where they took him through what happened, what had transpired, and then he made his comments, and, you know, shortly afterwards there was load shedding.
Yeah.
So I think what he's trying to do really is trying to be present. He's trying to be a present leader amidst a national crisis. So he doesn't want to be seen to be aloof. So from an optics point of view, it may well work. But from a practical point of view, there is nothing that Eskom will do differently because he's present. I think it's a question of empathy. He wants to be seen to be with the South Africans that are suffering.
Yeah. And you mentioned the practical side of things. I wonder whether we are either speaking out of sheer ignorance. Perhaps there are things that are happening in the background. I've just had a conversation with the Minister of Public Enterprises, and he seems to suggest that there are going to be moves inside Eskom in order to bolster some of the areas. And I asked a specific question. What do you mean? Do you mean that Andre Direte is on his way out? And he said an emphatic no, no, no. So, when we talk about things that have got to be done practically, who do you think has got to be on the chopping block?
Look, I mean, the main issue there at Eskom, as far as I'm concerned, is the failure to listen to the people who actually are running Eskom. The people that are running Eskom are engineers. It's the technical guys. And those are the same people, by the way, who were ignored when the crisis first started in somewhere around 2005, 2006, during Thabo Mbeki's time, who actually advised the Eskom board to say we need to increase Eskom's generation capacity. And then, of course, the government ignored them. Mbeki later on apologized for that. Those are the same people who were ignored many times when they raised issues. And if you look at the composition of Eskom board now, there is obviously lack of engineering capacity. Of all the Eskom board members, I think there's only one who is an engineer. And the Rater himself, the CEO, is not an engineer. And Eskom was founded on the back of serious engineering skills. The guy who founded Eskom, Hendrik van der Bijl, was himself an engineer. And he became the chairman, basically the guy who wrote the whole script of how Eskom should run. And one of the things that he did, and Eskom somehow lost it along the way, there was a principle that the Eskom's generation capacity, or its ability to provide energies, must always be way above demand. And that gap was allowed to happen, that deficit was allowed to happen over a period. So the question now is, with the kind of leadership that we have, can we get that back? Can we always have more capacity than demand? I think that's the big issue that people have to answer. If Pravin Gordhan now tells you that something has to be done at Eskom, is busy with something that's urgent, it must answer that question. Can we get back to a position where we have a power utility that has got more capacity to generate power than we need, so that when any of these units break down, we as members of the public would not be even aware of it.
Yeah.
Because you simply switch on the existing capacity, the spare capacity, and life goes on. Now we even know there's unit 1, there's unit, and people didn't even know that language for many years.
You're very right. You're very right. Let's talk about the Eskom board. Again, I asked Pravin Gordhan, are you satisfied with how they're performing? And his answer is, quote unquote, that's work in progress. What do you make of that?
Well, Kola, I mean, look, even if you listen to one of the board members who's very vocal, is outspoken, I'm sure you've interviewed her before.
Miss
yes, the head of Busa.
The head of Busa.
Yes.
Mavuso,
yes. She's very vocal. She writes a lot of public, opinion pieces, commenting on all of that. And she's sort of like become a critique of Eskom. And people ask, why would she have all these ideas? Is she not saying these things inside Eskom board? And is she perhaps being ignored with all these ideas that she has?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of questions to be asked about how the board is operating. And do they have the sufficient capacity to supervise and support management? Are they asking the right questions of management? And why is the board not complete? I mean, whose job is it that the board has to have full complement of members? As things stand now, the Eskom board is not complete.
Yeah.
And that's been the case for more than 24 months. Why has Pravin Gordhan or President Ramaphosa not appointed sufficient members of the board of Eskom, an entity that is in deep crisis? Why is that the case? Why there seems to be paralysis in decision making? If you can't make that simple governance decision, what more with all of the technical requirements of Eskom beneath the board? So Pravin Gordhan has questions to answer himself. I mean, the appointment of the board is his responsibility together with the president and cabinet. At least they must answer that before we can get to what's happening at power stations.
Let's talk politics now.
Yeah.
So, politically, it doesn't look good for President Ramaphosa to be dealing with the Eskom crisis, which he promised, by the way, making major promises in 2018 about how this is going to be sorted out. This from a person who was part of the Eskom war room for some time under Jacob Zuma. So, we're going to a conference in December. How are his political fortunes looking?
Well, in South Africa, unfortunately, sometimes crises and political fortunes don't always go together. You can lead a country in crisis and not make an impact, not make any change. Country can remain in crisis, and you can still have your fortunes in order from a political perspective. So, because the dynamics are different in the ANC. So there's ANC politics, which appears sometimes insulated from the reality of the country. So if you look at from an ANC perspective point of view, he seems to be unassailable at the moment because he doesn't have a proper, real challenger that can unseat him and that can give the ANC prospects of success come 2024. With all his failures, he seems to be the only guy who has that minimum that can at least help the ANC. I'm not saying he's going to succeed. He may well fail to get the ANC above 50% come 2024, but he's nonetheless still remains the better guy of all of the contestants that are available at the moment. That's the ANC dynamics.
Right.
The country dynamics are totally different because, as I said, the country dynamics, whether or not the country thinks he's done well, will be judged in 2024. So we have to go past December 1st, where he gets elected. Come 2024, we now have to make a judgment. What does the country think of his performance? If the country believes he has performed well, he's going to get 50 plus 1%, and he's going to become president again. But I think that's where perhaps the ANC has sort of failed. It doesn't link its own internal dynamics to the dynamics of the country. So it's kind of like an insulated party that appears to be less empathetic to what's happening in the country. So that's why people can do wrong things in government, but the ANC doesn't take political action to punish them. So I think, Koli, the other element we have to highlight here is, I think you said, for example, he sat in cabinet before as deputy president to Jacob Zuma and has led the war room on Eskom. What has he done? it's a question of what I think it's a crisis of ideas. It's a crisis of ideas in the ANC. The ANC basically doesn't know what to do with this energy crisis.
But how do you say that, Mpumelelo Mkhabela, with so much conviction when this country is full of plans? We have been told now, the rallying cry right now is implementation is a problem. We don't have the skills to implement. The country is full of plans.
Well, it's one thing to have a plan, and the question is, you have to figure out, Koli, how to implement that plan. First of all, is it an implementable plan? If we were to ask, what is South Africa's energy plan at the moment? So many of those plans we're referring to change all the time. If you look at the National Development Plan 2030, it refers to energy mix, and subsequent to that, the DMRE had a policy position on the energy mix 2019 paper. Subsequent to that, there was another paper published by Tito Mboweni, and he felt like, look, this country is stuck in what he called policy inertia, we're not moving, ended up leaving cabinet. And most recently, we have another paper published by the government's Climate Change Commission, which recommends a different path in terms of the energy transition. So these things keep on changing. Government changes policy even without implementing the initial policy proposal. So you never actually get to evaluate what is working, what is not working. So 2030 is going to be coming soon. It will be interesting when we look back and say, what happened to those lofty goals that were in that IDP? So it's a challenge. So there's a crisis of ideas in a sense that people say these things, but if you interrogate them, do they really believe in these things? Do they have a way to implement them? Do they have a way to evaluate them? At some point, you remember, there was this whole hullabaloo about the unit or department in the presidency of policy, of evaluation and all of that.
Monitoring,
Yes, and what happened to all of that?
One person, final question, one person that we have not spoken about, but who also forms part of the Eskom equation is Gwede Mantashe. He is the person whose department is supposed to deliver new capacity, new power into Eskom. How has he done? Because there are not very nice things being said about him.
Actually, Koli, that question brings me to Ramaphosa's management of cabinet. You see, a president can't run things by himself. You need trusted men and women around you. And the whole design of the national executive of the country, as contained in the constitution, is such that the ministers, the president has to trust the ministers, first of all. And the moment when he feels like someone is not doing their job, he has to sack them. So what has happened now, going back to even to the question you raised earlier of the president coming back, it says something about how does he relate to Gwede Mantashe, the Minister of Mineral Resources and Energy, Pravin Gordhan, the Minister of Public Enterprises, and the other ministers. Why does it seem as if there is no coherence in that whole cluster that deals with the economy and energy and all of that? You remember previously, Gwede Mantashe said the president twisted his arm to lift the threshold on independent power producers. So why does the president has to be twisting the minister's arm? It says something about...
It's supposed to be the other way around.
Yeah, it says something... There's something wrong with the way the cabinet works. Why is it that the president is not confident that he can do his international job wherever he is in the UK, UN, US, comfortable? That I've got a cabinet that can deliver. They're just a call away and they'll fulfill my instruction. Why does he has to come back? Why is it that the president cannot trust that the deputy president, who by constitutional powers invested in him, has got the capacity to act as president? Why doesn't the president think that, well, I've got a deputy president in the country. He knows what to do. He sits in my cabinet. Mr. Titi Mabuza, I can call on him. He can convene cabinet and he can, take the nation to his confidence and he can deliver. Why is it that the cabinet doesn't seem to be working properly? I mean, you can't solve anything unless the cabinet works properly. And if it doesn't work properly, the president has got constitutional powers. It's there in the constitution.
To hire and fire.
He can hire and fire. He can even rejig ministries. He can merge departments. He can do whatever. Why is that not working?
Mpumelelo Mkhabela, I think those answers are going to be shown to us in the near future, hopefully. Something has got to give. We can't remain in this situation. Mpumelelo Mkhabela, political analyst and author, thanks indeed for making the time.